edition of Ask an Astronomer here a day after International Women's Day. And so, of course, we have mine and your favorite astronomer, Marley, who was just talking to our executive director.
Yeah, I felt so bad. I'll have to call her back. That was so stressful. Hi, yeah, I'm fine. Just classic theater tech problems, but it'll be okay.
We're going to be fine, but of course, for this edition of Ask an Astronomer, like I said, yesterday was International Women's Day, so we thought that we would start off because it's also our monthly theme of Artemis, which I find fascinating now because when I'm talking to kids about Apollo and Artemis, they already kind of know what that relationship is because I think of because Percy Jackson. I think that there's a lot of like newer incarnations of Greek mythology that they now kind of like
Oh,
understand. Although I've never read Percy Jackson. Have you ever read Percy Jackson?
I did, yeah, which is why I was confused. I was like, how did those books have to do with moon missions? But now I realize it's the Greek mythology that you're going around, and now it
Yes.
makes more sense. But I was very confused.
Yeah, so that's really cool because, of course, they named the mission Artemis with a purpose. And as we're going to find out, there is a lot of intent to making the next humans on the moon to be female. And so that's going to be kind of like our theme for today. If you are out there watching on YouTube or on Facebook, drop a comment or a question into the chat and we will answer your questions. And of course, if you have any questions under the universe, we'll answer them before we get to our half-hour mark. So, Marley, let us get into Artemis. Who's going? Why are they going? What is Artemis? What's happening there?
What is happening? Oh, actually, just today there was a lot of news surrounding the Artemis mission, and also in like the past 2 days or so, there's been a lot of information coming out about it, largely because we had the review of Artemis 1, so that first mission that went to the moon, launched in November. And that came out as a success, right? So all of the things that needed to work correctly worked correctly according to their review. There were some things to work on. So that what includes, like in Artemis, what the mission includes is the Space Launch System, which is the rocket, the Orion spacecraft, which is what the astronauts will eventually be in, and exploration ground systems. And that's always kind of a more nebulous, like, what is that? But that's like the mobile launcher, the launch pad, like all of that stuff down there on the ground that is necessary. So the Space Launch System, it flew as designed and with precision, and the systems met and often exceeded expectations. So that's great because that'll be the vehicle that will get the people into space. It worked eventually. Remember, there was like 1,001 delays with that thing, but it did work by the end there. The Orion spacecraft did extraordinarily well. It collected more than 155 gigabytes of data collected, which doesn't like sound like a lot if you work with like video or media production. As I was talking with our like productions person, Millie, they were like, that doesn't sound like very much at all. And I was like, but it's a lot, like in terms of just collecting information constantly. So it did quite well with that. 161 mission test objectives were completed, and 20 of those were just added in mid-flight. They weren't even on the original list. And the data from the European built service module. So half of this is at NASA, the kind of like the capsule, like the nose, and then the back end is ESA's. But it generated 20% more power than the initial expectations, and at the same time consumed 25% less power than the prediction showed. So it did exceptionally well. Like, if you were to write that equation out, it did more with less essentially, which is really, really good. And the pyrotechnic devices worked very well. The 375 pyrotechnic devices, those were in separation events, like when it separated from the launch abort system during the ascent of the spacecraft, and then the parachute deployment during the landing. All of those worked perfectly to get things done and to work well. And then there were some problems, not problems, but just curious things that popped up. So during the flight, observations showed that variations across the appearance of the heat shield, it wore away differently than they predicted it would. So they have to take another look at that. And a post-flight inspection of the spacecraft showed a good amount of the original material remained, which is odd. They thought more of it might have come off or maybe in a different way. So there's some things they have to look at with this spacecraft, which is important because, again, that's where the people are going to be. So this is kind of a lot of work being done on that now. And exploration ground systems, that's the mobile launcher. When I talk about that, I'm talking about this big, I don't know, metal thing here.
Of course,
Quite large.
with the old school logo as well.
Oh, that's on the side rocket booster. I'm not sure if the mobile launcher has the worm font, but that's what it's called. And the other one, the insignia, is called like the meatball.
Yeah.
That experienced like 39 million newtons of force during the launch of the rocket. And so there's quite a lot of damage to it. They anticipate damage, but more damage than what was expected. Approximately like 60 broken panels and cabinets that have different instrumentation on it, corrosion to tubing and fueling lines, detached wells on tubing, elevators were broken, and blast shields were completely destroyed. And the thing is, with Artemis 1 and Artemis 2, they're both kind of like recycle missions. So Artemis 1, its engines from the SLS were actually old space shuttle engines. And for Artemis 2, avionics from the Orion capsule and the mobile launcher are both going to be reused from Artemis 1, as well as I think one of the SLS is being almost entirely rebuilt. But the kind of key parts are being reused. So it's important that they fix the things that they're going to use again heading into Artemis 2. And I just wanted to highlight this really cool image I found. This is an image of the launch team from Artemis 1. Well, 30% of the launch team. And the launch director is in the center holding the plaque. That's launch director Charlie Blackwell Thompson. And she's with all of the women on her launch team, which comprised 30% of the overall team. She was launch director in 2016, and she oversaw the countdown and liftoff of the SLS and Orion during Artemis 1. And she was the final word for go, like the final determination for go. That's like what part of what her job is whether or not that rocket does end up launching. And so she, very good job, like good work. Like they got the rocket in the sky, and her team should be very proud of themselves.
Awesome. Is there like a special status to being that person that says go? Is that kind of like, or is it just sort of like ceremonial?
No, it's a big deal. Like if she has to pull her team, right? So in mission control, well, at least like if you watch the launch from the 16th, she's like kind of up above everyone else, right? Standing, and she has her own little section. But then on the ground, there's like all the different teams, like flight, weather, all these different teams that have to come together to make sure that this works, to make sure that the rocket is okay to launch, and to make sure everything's working the way it should to launch. And so she has to poll her team, right? And ask them, like, is this good to go? Is this good to go? And so like her team will tell her if it is, but she gets final say, final determination as the launch director, whether it's go, no go for launch, because she's in charge of, the spacecraft, the launch of the spacecraft. And she's like the head of like the ground systems, the exploration ground system. So the mobile launcher and all that stuff. And if anything is wrong, like she has the authority to say no go to the launch.
Okay, so that's kind of like the what, and of course, like the what of what happened last year. We are gearing up though for Artemis II. So how are we getting from this to Artemis II?
Oh yeah, Artemis II. So it's been pushed back. Unsurprisingly, I was not shocked. Just happens. Till November 2024 is now their day or their time. I do feel like I need to point out that this is during hurricane season still in the Atlantic waters. So like off the coast of Florida. November is like near the tail end of hurricane season. So just like with the first mission, there was like the hurricane, they had to roll it back. Like that can still be a problem in 2024. But now we have to gear up to Artemis II, which is a slightly different mission because now we're introducing people, right? So the SLS has to be rebuilt. Orion has to be kind of reconfigured and different things added to it. And the exploration ground systems, all that stuff has to be repaired. So on the front of the SLS, they're installing the engine section onto the core stage. That should be done in May. Orion, the heat shield needs to be attached. It gets a new heat shield. And the recovery team and Department of Defense has been completing a lot of tests, which we'll talk about in a second. And the exploration ground system, of course, they're repairing that mobile launcher, and they're expected to transport the mobile launcher to the launch pad sometime this summer to undergo some testing. But with the Orion capsule itself, now we have to worry about recovering not only the capsule, but also the astronauts inside of them, because space travel is not good on the body. It's not kind to the body. And if you've watched like astronauts return to Earth before from much longer extended periods of time in space, they often have they're not able to walk. They're not as mobile as they were when they left, right, from the effects of gravity. Mm-hmm. And so they have, teams have to go in and get them, especially if it's a water landing. They have to get them. And they did a test in February, They kept the capsule in water for nearly 2 weeks to make sure it was stable while floating in different configurations, like the configuration in the bottom bottom left-hand corner there. Yeah, it could enter the water that way. It shouldn't, but it could, and the team of divers who recover the astronauts need to be able to get to them and get them out. And so it's all part of this big thing of making sure the people inside the capsule are safe, but the people outside the capsule are able to do their job.
So are you saying that they've accounted for potentially having the capsule be in the ocean with astronauts inside for up to 2 weeks?
Well, they leave it. I don't think that they let them live there for 2 weeks in the capsule, but they leave it in the water just to continue to do all those tests. But
Okay.
it could, like, if they lose it, like they could be in there for 12 weeks. Like the ocean is dangerous.
Right.
I say 12 weeks or 12 days. I can't remember now, but it was not. I don't think it was weeks. 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks is what I should have said. I don't know if I said 12. But yeah, 2.5 weeks in the water. The ocean's violent. I don't know. Like it always looks so nice when they first come down, but then I'm like, the ocean's too big. Like there's so many, so stressful. But this is Liliana Villarreal, who is the Artemis II landing and recovery director in Exploration Ground Systems. So she's in charge of overseeing the testing of this Orion capsule and responsible for leading NASA's efforts for recovery of the astronauts and the Orion hardware for the Artemis crew mission. So her job, like she's also like has a very, very important job, and it's kind of a more of the behind the scenes type of job, which is why I wanted to highlight it. Like a lot of this work could not happen without people like her doing this work and overseeing this really crucial part of the testing of the capsule.
Yeah, absolutely. Like at no point during the mission, if anything happens to the astronauts, will it be considered like a successful mission, right? It's all, dependent on the health and safety of those astronauts.
Yeah, entirely. Yeah.
Very cool. Just seeing the picture of that capsule kind of like just like tipped on its side is like starting to give me anxiety. So
okay. I know I don't like that either. Yeah. But for Artemis II, right, it's the first crewed mission, the first crewed test flight to the moon since Apollo. This is an image from NASA Artemis program of what kind of like the steps are. There's not really like this is the best one I can find. And there's a lot happening, but this will all happen in 10 days. Like the mission itself is only supposed to be about 10 days long as they go from Earth around the moon and come back. So a short flight. And the big question is, who will the astronauts be, right? Like who will they be? So
breaking news, everyone.
Breaking news.
This is like literally that you yelled from down the hallway like 15 minutes ago. So on April 3rd, NASA will announce the crew of Artemis II for the Artemis II mission. Today, March 9th, was the State of NASA address. So Bill Nelson, who's the head of NASA, gave an address kind of talking about the state of NASA and what they've been doing and looking ahead to the future for this year. And so he said April 3rd will be the day that the crew will be announced. And that means we will know of the crew of four, 3 will be Americans and 1 will be Canadian. And so we will know them on April 3rd. So put this in your calendars, though I think it'd be funny if Canada just announced their astronaut like earlier. I think that'd be fun. And also on March 15th, NASA and the Axiom Space Company will debut prototypes for the spacesuits for Artemis III. So that's next week, March 15th. We'll be able to see what they will be wearing or the prototypes of what they'll be wearing on the moon. And I think I talked about this like years ago, how the spacesuits have to be different, like quite different for this mission, because we learned so much more about the moon. Yeah, like those spacesuits that they're using now in the ISS, like they were designed back in like the 70s, right?
Oh, the spacewalk. Yeah. The EVA suits. They're so big and so bulky. And even like when they like on the suits they wore for the moon EVAs, like they are also like quite big and quite bulky. And now we kind of know better how to ambulate around on the moon and move around on the moon. And so they can be a bit sleeker and be a bit different, but they also have to have a lot of like less places for air and dust to get in and out because the moon is very dusty, I guess. Like it's a problem. But I'm excited for that one, the crew and also the spacesuits.
Okay, so we're gonna get a crew. We're gonna get hopefully that Canadian around the same time. I'll try to see if I can get any advanced knowledge. I do have some contacts with the Canadian Space Agency to see.
I doubt it. They wouldn't even tell me if I was right with my guesses for the James Webb Space Telescope first images. So I don't know.
But at least they can tell us like when it's going to be. That's like that's kind of like what's important. So of course, if you're out there. and you don't know about our Canadian astronauts, we've got four. And I always like to tell this, we've got lots of information in our gallery space. Like, go learn about those four astronauts because they've been working really hard for like the last several years. Well, one of them in particular for a very long time,
Yeah.
waiting for this moment. So it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. I'm very excited. It's exciting that a Canadian astronaut gets to go. That's we got the seat kind of because we give them robotics, right? So we give you something. Please give us two. We got two seats, and one of them is for Artemis II. So
Yeah,
it'll be
yeah,
awesome.
and of course that is going to lead to a whole bunch of other initiatives at the Canadian Space Agency. They just announced, the rover that's going to go to the moon. So that's all kind of like tied into Canada as a country, really investing with this partnership. They've always had a partnership with NASA, but now really that is been strengthened with the Lunar Gateway and Artemis, and even James Webb too, right? Those three in particular have been really good, and so we'll see sort of like all the other countries, they're going to start coming to the moon, right? It's like now that everyone's going, it's like, oh, we got to go too.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really, really interesting, and we should do probably like a whole episode just on all of the different countries and all of the different missions that are going to be coming out, going to the moon.
It'd have to be longer than half an hour. There's so many.
Awesome. So is that all the information we have about like the crew?
No, I have some, like, I don't know, just some ideas of who the crew could be.
Okay.
Like, I wanted to highlight some because they had a back in 2020, they said like this is the Artemis team, and it was a crew of 18 or a selection of 18 astronauts. And then in 2022, NASA said no, all active astronauts could qualify to be this. So this is where the fun begins. Now it gets to be like, ooh, who's gonna go? Who'll get to be the astronaut on this one? So this is Christina Cook. She was selected as an astronaut in 2013, and she has spent 328 days, 13 hours, and 58 minutes in space. She actually holds the record for the longest continuous stay for a woman in space. She,
wow.
like Peggy Whitson has the longest time collected cumulatively, but Christina has the longest time in one go, longest continuous stay. And her extended mission wasn't meant to be an extended mission. It was extended due to some crew problems, like crew issues with getting the next crew up. And so her extended mission is used to study the physical, biological, and mental effects of long-term space travel on women, which is important for a mission like Artemis and for future missions with longer times being spent in space. She worked in space science instrument development and was also a research associate in the United States Antarctic program. She actually overwintered in Antarctica for a time and was a firefighter and rescue operator in Antarctica, which is very, very cool. So she's very familiar with hostile environments, essentially being in Antarctica for that long. And she worked prior as a lot of electrical engineering stuff. So she's a name that comes up a lot when it comes to who could be an astronaut to go, because NASA has specifically said that they'll be sending a woman and people of color on these missions, and that each mission will have a woman and a person of color in the mission crew. So she's a name that gets brought up quite a bit. I think I mentioned this what lovely woman last episode, Dr. Jessica Watkins. So she's also a big candidate. She and Christina were both some of the original 18 that NASA had selected. She has her bachelor's of science in geological and environmental sciences from Stanford University and a PhD in geology from UCLA. So she actually served as mission specialist on NASA's SpaceX Crew 4 mission, which concluded October of 2022. And she's done so many different things that I don't have enough time to talk about them all, but they're all very interesting. So her graduate research studied the mechanisms of large landslides on Mars and Earth. But she also did system design testing for Perseverance and the sample return mission, and was a science team collaborator for Curiosity. So I really feel that if Jessica Watkins doesn't fly around the moon, that she will be one of the people to land on it, because her focus is so geologically focused, right? And a lot of the lunar missions are going for restudying the geology of the lunar surface, that search for water and different planetary mechanisms there. I really feel like she's a great candidate, and I really hope that she gets chosen to go. It'd be very exciting. I love her work. Yeah, she's just very interesting.
Of course, we are giving people lots of tips if they want to go and bet on who the next Artemis astronauts are going to be. Well, we're not giving anyone any betting tips. We don't advocate for betting, but I'm just we're giving you our best guesses, so to speak.
I don't know. She'd be really cool. I think she's just neat. I don't know. A lot of her work, I think, also interests me, which is that as well. But, and of course, on the Canadian side, our female astronaut is Dr. Jenny City Gibbons, who is from Calgary, which is a big deal because I'm from Calgary. No other reason. She has her PhD in engineering and she focused on combustion, right? And worked on the development of low emission combustors for gas turbine engines, which is very cool and interesting in a different way from how Jessica Watkins and Christina Cook's science is interesting. And she was selected by the Canadian Space Agency in 2017. She has not yet gone to space. Most of the Canadian Space Agency astronauts haven't yet gone to space. But I don't think that's not going to be a problem. Like one of ours gets to go, so it could be her as well. Out of our four, she has a chance of going as well.
So just to think about the timeline of things, Artemis II is going to orbit around the moon, right? Artemis III, that's going to be the one to land on the moon.
That's when people will land. Yeah,
that's when people land on the moon. And will that one have a Canadian, or is the Canadian to land on the moon? That potentially is in the future. That
would be a future mission. Yeah, so that wouldn't be on Artemis III. That would be later Artemis missions. A Canadian will go. That's very classic NASA. But yeah.
Now, have they announced like what Artemis 4 or 5, like any of the initiatives, any of that, anything beyond? It's just like let's just focus on Artemis 3. And then
no, it's kind of like I think they've planned out to 7 Artemis missions. But a lot of there's no real scientific goal for any of those missions past Artemis 3. So it's kind of just like maintaining the work that we've been doing is kind of what, if you read in between the lines, what it says, it's like continue to study this, continue to do this. But the goal is to have a semi-permanent human presence on the moon, right? Some sort of continuous human presence there. So that will be helped along by Gateway, which is complementary yet separate from the Artemis missions. Like Gateway can go ahead without Artemis going ahead sort of thing. It's not entirely reliant on it. And that will do more of the orbiting stuff. The hope is to have Gateway launched in time for Artemis III astronauts to dock with Gateway and then go down to the surface. But based on the timelines of Gateway and where they are and the timelines of where Artemis III is supposed to launch, I don't think those will quite match up unless Artemis III gets delayed, which I feel like it will. Because it's currently scheduled for November 2025. And I feel like that's just, they do 12 months, but I feel like that's not going to work. Yeah.
Interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to be happening at the same time. And of course, within that timeline is also, the lifespan of the International Space Station, which he keeps getting sort of extended, right? But that's also looming on the horizon because once that's ended, then we no longer have a place to send astronauts.
Yeah, I think that's scheduled to deorbit in 2031. So they've given it a date for that to be done. Yeah, that's sad. I'll be really sad when that comes down. It's very, very cool. A lot of good science have been down there, but we do lose a place to send astronauts, though. I think part of it will become where the private sector comes in, because I know many different private companies are working to build their own space stations, but I don't quite understand or know what for, but that's their goal.
Just so you know, Keith looked up and there are betting odds for the astronaut selection.
I'm sure there are. Yeah, that doesn't shock me. What's Jessica Watkins at? I really want her to go.
So hopefully, there's probably some bots out there that probably have no idea. They were just oh, we'll just give it even odds to everyone. But then they're going to find this video and they're like, oh dear, maybe we should wait Jess Watkins.
I really hope so. Listen, I was wrong for the images for JWST, so I don't really have a good average in terms of predicting things. I just really want things to happen, and they don't.
Well, of course, my personal feelings is for Jeremy Hansen, because he was one of the first astronauts that I ever met. Actually, when I first started working here, we're around the same age, and he's been at this a long time. So that's kind of that's my personal feelings. But of course, all 4 of the Canadian astronauts would be amazing to go. And this whole mission is very exciting. Kids get excited when we talk about this stuff. We are diving into this all month here at the H.R. MacMillan Space Center. We got a brand new planetarium planetarium show that is starting this Saturday called Forward to the Moon. So that's going to be pretty cool. Come on down. Spring break is starting. So this place is going to be hopping every single day. But you can buy advanced tickets, right? So you can go onto the website and you can get tickets. Plus, we're going to hold off on the evening show. So if you're looking to come down to the observatory, do some observing tomorrow night, it's probably your last chance until after spring break. So yeah, so come on by for that. We've only got a few more minutes, 5 more minutes. So if you were out there and you want to get in a question for Marley before we end the show, throw in a question. Of course, Hannah did throw out that all the Greek gods, well, the Roman gods are named for the planets, and Greek gods are the constellations, right? Like there's a lot of like overlap of Roman and Greek when it comes to naming of things out there, right?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, I've never actually really looked into where those names come from, whether it's Greek or Roman. They're just names, but I do I don't buy. Yeah, and if you think, thinking on it, most of the constellations anyway are Greek, the Ptolemy constellations, and then the planets tend to be Roman, I guess. Yeah, Jupiter's a Roman name, but I've never really thought about it. But that's cool. Yeah. What are the moons? Are the moons also Roman? Like that's the other thing. Like
yes. Yes, I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah. Most of them. Is Callisto Greek? No, because there's the thing is some of them can be Greek, some of them can be Roman, and some of them have the same name, which is like if it's Greek or Roman mythology, the names doesn't change, which is I can never tell.
But then, of course, as we have seen in many of the programs that we've done here at the Space Center, bringing in Indigenous knowledge. We just had a great meeting today with Shandine Pete, who's going to probably come back and do another program with us. Talking about different stories, Indigenous peoples across this whole continent. Actually, he's been all over the place gathering lots of knowledge. So that's really cool stuff to delve into. But to get back to the moon, of course, this is what we've been talking about. I don't see any more questions coming up. Lots of chatter about the astronaut selection. Pride and Keith are probably going to put some money down. And they're probably going to cite you, Marley, as
please don't.
Or if you win, then come on back and we'll have a party here at the Space Center.
If Jessica Watkins gets chosen, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to be so excited for her. I just think she's so cool.
Yeah. Well, folks, that is the end of this edition of Ask an Astronomer. We will be back right here in 2 weeks at our new time at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Glad that everyone is now on track for our 2023 schedule. Because like I said, we'll be back in the middle of spring break, which is going to be March the 23rd, right here, 4 p.m. Pacific time on YouTube and Facebook. Thanks so much, everyone. Clear skies, look up, and dream of humans going back to the moon. Take care, everyone.